Alright guys, we are here to take a brief demo on the box of the box model. As usual, let's go straight up to our H1 and headline news, then our P with like 80 words. Okay, so all we have is the H1 and okay, let's refresh and we got it right there. Okay, let's now first of all change the background of the body from white to black. This is a white space that the H1, the heading and the paragraph are on is the body itself. Let's change the body from white to black with the style attribute. This is the body tag. We introduce the style attribute and change the background color from white to black. Refresh. Our heading and paragraph just disappeared. What happened? Because they are also black in color. So what do? We give a color property of white. What this means is that anything that is on the body should take a font color of white. Let's go and refresh. That's it. The heading and the paragraph now have color of white. Okay, but we can single out the heading to have its own font color of orange. In this case, we go to the heading tag and incorporate a style, set the color to orange, refresh. Now, while the paragraph is taking the color that the body element gives to it, the heading itself has to be independent and say, no, I want my own color to be orange. And that's what you have right here on the screen. Over to the box of the box model. I'm going to introduce first the border property. Remember, there are three parameters you should always have in mind when you're talking about the box of the box model. It is the padding, the border, and the margin. The padding represents internal spacing, while the margin represents external spacing. The border is just there to separate the padding from the margin. Remember, the border we said is like a compound fence, while the house is the content. The space between the house and the fence is the padding, while the space outside the fence is the margin. Are we getting it? Good. Alright then, let's introduce a border property on the heading tag. Go to the H1, after the semicolon, we'll type border, put a colon, type 2 pixel solid blue, colon. That's the border around the heading elements. Like we already know, the heading and the paragraphs are block level elements. So even if the heading just has 2 words, it actually is occupying the full space, the full width of the screen. That is why when you set the border property, it goes all the way from left to right across the screen. All right, now let's set the border property for the paragraph. We'll go to the paragraph, introduce our style attribute that is used to give extra features to an element. The border property, set it to 2 pixel solid yellow. Let's give the paragraph a yellow border. When you refresh, you see the paragraph now has a yellow border. So these are two boxes, the heading box and the paragraph box. Are we together? Good. All right, now we've seen the border set around the heading and the paragraph. So of the 3 parameters I wanted us to focus on about the box of the box model, one of the properties or parameters we've seen in display, which is the border property. Remember, the border is like the fence of a compound, while the content is like the house and the compound. But notice here, we have the content and the border actually touching each other. Like the content is literally sticking to the side of the border. On the paragraph, for instance, the top border, right border, bottom border, and left border are all touching the content, which it's not good for visual hierarchy. So we're going to create some kind of space between the border and the content. So if I may ask, which of the parameters do we need to use to create space between the border and the content? Remember, we have parameters of padding and margin. Yeah, you got that right. The padding is used to set or control internal spacing between the content and the border. All right, so let's go over to our code editor and key in the padding property for the paragraph such that there will be space between the content and the border. So let's set the padding to 15 pixels for the border for the paragraph. Go over to our browser and refresh. You'll see now that there is a space all around the content. A space equivalent to 15 pixels has been set to push the content away from the border. Let's do same for the heading. We'll go to the heading, and after the last semicolon, we add a padding property of 15 pixels for the heading. When you refresh, now the headline news has been spaced away from the border itself. So this is how the padding property works. All right, that's the padding in action. Let's turn our attention to the margin property. Remember, just as padding is used to control internal spacing between the content and the border or the fence, the external space outside the fence or outside the border represents the margin. So if I want to create a space between these two, further space between these two elements, that's to increase this gap here, I would set the margin property for any one of them, any one or both of them. But let's choose to set margin for just one of them and see what happens when we set the margin for the H1. Let's set the margin for the H1. Just observe what happens, okay? All right. We'll go to the H1, and after the semicolon, we key in the margin property and set the margin to 20 pixels. Let's go back to our web page and refresh. You see, the margin of the H1 has been increased by 20 pixels. All right, take note of the margin to the left here was also applied, margin right was also applied, margin top, margin bottom. Let's increase the margin further. Let's just take a wild figure of like 100 pixels and see what happens. Refresh. You see, the margin of the H1 or the heading has pushed the paragraph further down. The heading has also moved certain spaces away from the top of the web page. It has moved that same 100 pixel space away from the left hand side of the web page as well as on the right hand side of the web page. That is what the margin property does. Now let's say we just want to set the margin property to give space between the heading and the paragraph. We don't want it to affect the left hand side or the right hand side. We want the left and right hand side to still align with this yellow border. What do? In that case, we'll set just one side of the margin property. Mind you, when you set margin, you're setting the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. That is why all four sides of the heading elements got that space. In order to set only one side, which is the bottom in this case, to push the paragraph away from the heading, we need to set margin bottom only. So go back to our code editor. Instead of setting or typing margin, let me take it out. Let's type margin hyphen bottom and set it to 100 pixels. Let's go back to our web page and refresh. You see that now? The top margin of the heading has gone back to its default state. The left side of the margin has gone back to its default state, and the right margin of the headline has gone back to its default state. It's only the bottom that was set, which is why the paragraph was pushed further down away from the heading. This is clear enough, I believe. Let's proceed. All right, we've talked about the border. You've seen the border, you've seen the padding and the margin in action. As an aside, I just want us to do a little bit of bonus styling on our elements here. I want to increase the font size of the headline and the font size of the paragraph. Let's go back to our code editor. Let's start with increasing the font size of the paragraph. After the last semicolon, key in a space and type font hyphen size and set the font size. Let's set the font size of the paragraph to 35 pixels. Refresh our web page. Paragraph is now bigger in font. All right, let's go to our heading and also include a style property, a property of font size in our style attribute. Font size. Let's increase the font size of the heading to 75 pixels. Go back to our web page and refresh. The headline is now bigger. One more thing that we're going to do is, let's assume we want to change the color of a certain number of words. The entire paragraph is white in color, but what if we want to change just a few words and change their color to like light blue? How do we go about that? We'd use a span tag. All right, the span tag is used to group certain elements or words together for them to have a separate style. Let's go ahead to our code editor and wrap a certain portion of our paragraph on a span tag. This is a span tag. It's an opening and closing tag. So what we'll do now is to use it now. That's the opening tag. Let's use it to wrap around just these words from quotes to consecutor. Okay, when we go to our web page and refresh, nothing happens because we've not added a style to the span tag. Now let's go and style the span tag and give it, introduce the style attribute first, then we'll give it a color of light blue. Let's see if that works. It did not work. Guess I did not spell the light blue well. Let's go and refresh. It worked, but it's a bit faint. Let's give it a color of Dodger blue. Dodger blue. Refresh. I guess you can see it a bit more clearer now. So the span tag has been used to group these words together and give them a separate style of their own. We can also give it the style of, those words that are grouped under the span tag. We can also reduce their font size. Key in a semicolon here and give it a smaller font size of 20 pixels. If we go and refresh our page, you see those words now have a smaller font size because the span tag is wrapped around it, and whatever setting or attributes that the style of the span tag offers is what they would obey and go by. All right, so that's just an aside. I wanted to show you how to use the span tag to group certain words or elements in order to give them a separate style from the general styling that the elements may have. All right, let me hold it right here. Over to you now. Take it away. Go ahead, use the style attribute to modify the feature of elements, features of font size, font color, padding, margin, set border. Just keep practicing, for that's a sure way for you to get all the best.